Hello, everybody, and welcome to the YouTube channel. I'm Martino Puccio. Alongside me is Mike Phillips. So just to give a little bit of a background, considering my YouTube channel is mostly soccer content, I am obviously a huge Mets, Jets, not Nets, well, Celtics and Devils fan. So there's a bunch of American sports that I always like to discuss. And the one person that I usually do that on podcasts is my good friend Mike Phillips of the Just and the Suffering podcast, which is based on so many things and so many different topics. But as you could tell, Just and the Suffering comes from two teams in particular, I would say, Mike. So how are you, first of all? You excited for the holiday season and everything that's transpiring after the winter meetings?
Doing good today, guys. Thanks for having me on your channel here. I'm very excited about the holiday season. Always a lot of fun this time of the year. And you mentioned here the podcast is very self-explanatory why it's named what it is.
Yes, exactly. But you just don't cover sports on there. There's also movies, TV, and you also have your Sky Guys podcast, which is centered around Star Wars as well. But if you're just interested in sports, which most of the people that view this channel anyways, or if you're just coming for the first time and clicking the thumbnail, we're here to talk about our beloved Metsies. Listen, we've been meaning to do more podcast stuff in general regarding the Mets, but it's been kind of hectic over the past, couple of years, especially after graduating. But we're here to discuss probably one of the bigger off seasons in Mets history. We feel like we say that almost every single year. But I think this one has more long-term implications than most because in past off seasons that we've seen, there's been so much, right? Like it's kind of hard to encapsulate the start of the Cohen era and who he hired for the front office and where we're at today and how much stuff has gone down in that time frame, because you've had multiple GMs, you've had multiple assistant GMs, multiple managers at this point as well. So the fact that we are basically having our first offseason in the David Stearns era, we'll just throw it to that, Mike. David Stearns hired as the Pobo. We knew that this was the really big role that Steve Cohen wanted to fill in anyways. We knew the hirings of, Jared Porter, the Zach Scotts of the world, the Billy Eplers. We knew the Mets were going to have guys like that, but there wasn't that one guy in particular that would oversee the entire organization. David Stearns is that. So I know I and Will, our good friend Will Shanahan, always wanted David Stearns to come in and have things going under his control. But what are your initial thoughts of it? Because were you over the moon with this, or you were just kind of cautiously optimistic about what he was going to do and try and build, considering what we saw at the deadline this past summer?
Well, I mean, you think about David Stearns. I mean, look at what he's done in Milwaukee over the years. I mean, that's one of the smallest markets in the league. They don't put a ton in payroll. He routinely wins trades. I mean, they gave nothing with Christian Yelich all those years ago with the Marlin deal. They made the playoffs was it 5 out of 6 years, Martino, they made it with under Stearns? There's
and to put it into context, the Mets have never made it 3 years in a row, but he managed to get them there 5 of 6 years. Yeah, so.
Yeah, he's done a good job finding talent on the margin, something this organization has always struggled with. They always can find the stars. They can't find the guys who fill out 18 to 25 on the roster, 26 to 40 very well.
Your Wally Backmans and Mookie Wilson types.
Yeah, they have not found those guys in a long time, so I trust Stearns in that. Plus, I do feel like that this sort of cycle of talent here they sort of have to go to the front office, having it stop with a guy we know has a proven track record, I think is very good.
Yeah, and you kind of seen some of those moves almost immediately, because the first thing that you saw was 12 guys or so being cut from the 40-man roster, a bunch of players that we saw kind of get their cup of coffee and really just never see them again. I mean, there's a ton to go through the list, but I guess you could say one of the bigger ones would be a Daniel Vogelbach, for the simple fact that Daniel, despite his salary being really low, wasn't really the greatest of fits. We kind of saw the leaks coming towards the end of the season where you hear it was basically Buck Showalter from all sources basically saying that he was battling with Billy Epler on the decision to sit Daniel Vogelbach, which is something Buck wanted to do. But as we all saw throughout the season, that we saw Daniel Vogelbach consistently get at bats, while we saw a ton of minor leaguers that were basically hugged by Billy Epler at the 2022 trade deadline, where they didn't go for it, which kind of, I think, was the starting domino effect to where the Mets are today, if you really ask me. So to see that transpire and not have those three third basemen really get that opportunity when they were scorching hot at Syracuse, because you had guys like Vogelback blocking them, Eduardo Escobar, who they eventually traded. I think that Stearns' comments initially about these younger guys, and we'll get into that in a little bit, it's just kind of refreshing to hear the way he talks about things and the way he's really approaching things so far. So your thoughts on like his overall smaller moves at the moment, right? Because we'll get into Severino, but guys like Tonkin, and we just saw Lopez just last night signing a 1 year, $2 million contract. It's stuff like that that you kind of see Stearns try and fill out this 40-man roster.
Yeah, first of all, I gotta give her a shout out here to some of the guys who were in that initial wave of 12 who got cut, whether it was the Jonathan Arauz, Rafael Ortega, like Danny Mendick. Like, there was a lot of like useless space on that 40-man roster, so Stearns wasted no time getting rid of it, which was good.
That's your immaculate grid guys, basically, right?
Yeah, all the immaculate grid guys here. Although they don't help me that much. I don't remember where the other places they played are, so...
That's why we just put them in a vacuum of 12 people. But again, though, I think these were really just guys. And this is like the funny thing that people are just so upset with Stearns with, and in particular Mets fans. But what else is new is that they're just kind of upset about not the larger moves happening already, despite the fact that many clubs don't have larger moves outside maybe the Yankees and a couple other ball clubs, maybe like the Diamondbacks with Eduardo Rodriguez. But the overall point remains in this is Stearns has to fill out a 40-man roster. He has to get his guys within the organization. You see moves like in the Rule 5 draft where he's selecting Slater and then immediately flipping him to Boston, just using the resources at his disposal. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's anything that you can get angry at if you're a Mets fan for that. Maybe if you're impatient, but we kind of knew what this offseason was going to be like. If they are able to go and grab a top-of-the-end starter on the market, like a Yamamoto, which will be up next, then that's great. But you have to fill out a team, like you mentioned. And that's kind of what he's been doing so far. So we'll kind of just get into big game hunting. And I think this is obviously the most important thing for the offseasons, and we'll obviously see how it transpires over the next, I guess, week or so. I think by this time next week, we'll know where Yamamoto will be playing for the next 8 to 10 years, maybe. So Yamamoto for $300 million, I think, this is the number that it's going to reach. From what we've seen today, Mark Feinsand and Andy Martino both basically reporting that this is going to be a Subway Series for one of the elite pitchers that we've seen hit the free agent market, regardless of his lack of experience in Major League Baseball. And again, Yamamoto has been scouted for a very long time and has been brought up across multiple different fronts, whether it's reporting during the season or after. But Yamamoto for $300 million just feels like it's going to happen. And just for this reason as to why I think the Mets should go to this number, and I think the Yankees might get close to it, is the sheer fact that if you think a guy like this at the age of 25 is going to be the best pitcher in baseball, and we saw Garrett Cole, who is one of the 3 to 5 best pitchers in baseball, probably top 3 at this point, right? See him get $324 million in his late 20s just a few years ago, going for a kid at the age of 25 and giving him $300 million up front, I think is a great deal. You could see how well that's potentially going to age over the next few years. And no disrespect to a Luis Severino, but if Severino's getting $13 million on a reclamation project here, you're essentially saying if it's 300 for 10, he's getting paid $17 million more. So a guy who's technically a reclamation project, like I mentioned, is getting 70 is a little bit more than double in the salary. I think if Yamamoto is a Cy Young winner, $30 million a year is a steal, and you don't really care about the risk involved in like him not playing in Major League Baseball, which is the only caveat in all this, right? I mean, besides of his frame, I think some people were arguing that he might not age as well. But the fact is this, he's 25 years of age. The consensus is that this is one of the best talents that has ever come out of Japan, especially for a pitcher, definitely since Tanaka. This is a no-brainer move for Steve Cohen and the Mets to reach this number. I think they offer over at the very least $300 million. Do you agree with that? And would you see the Mets doing this? And do you think that's enough to take him away from the Yankees?
Yeah, I think for sure I would do it. I think they would do it too. I mean, we saw Steve Cohen and Dave Stearns flew out to Japan to go have French whatever cuisine with Yamamoto and
French Japanese cuisine, yeah.
with Yamamoto and his mother and some people that he knows. So I mean, they're very serious
Yeah,
about it.
Kodai Senga's translator was also there as well with Stearns and Steve Cohen. That was also reported. So give the credit to
Yeah,
Andy Martino there, but go on.
yeah, we see that they're very interested, and you look at the long term deals they've given out. Like they are not like the Yankees that have as many long term deals here. They gave one to Lindor when he was in his 20s. They gave one. He's still in his 20s right now. They gave one to Nimmo who turned 30, and they stretched it out for 8 years lower than AAV. Don't have a ton of long term money on the books, so like if they want to do it, they can do it. And I don't even think the worry right now is the Yankees. The worry is what's going on in this Ohtani situation because if the flight reports are true when he goes to Toronto, you got a whole nother problem coming in here with the Dodgers.
Okay, so that's a great transitional question then. Are you fearful of the Dodgers of coming in at like the 13th hour here and to try and 23rd hour basically to just come in and swoop? Like what are is it or if you're Yamamoto, I'm not to say we know what his decision is, but if we're hearing top reporters are saying it's coming down to these two, like, do the Dodgers even have a chance at this point? Like, is that I'm not to say to rule out the Dodgers, just instantly because of that, but how much harder is it for them to actually get back in this race if the Yankees and Mets are so far ahead?
I think the thing with them, you have to remember, is I'm sure that they've been over there a lot. I'm sure that they went over and talked to him, and they had people talk to his people, and like they're where they're interested. They probably had a lower price point because they're in Otani, but like all that money they probably had earmarked for Otani can go somewhere else if he signs in Toronto, for example, or he signs with the Cubs or the Rangers or wherever your rumor is. And like if he goes there, the Dodgers who went under the tax on purpose last season so they could have money to go get a guy, not to pay the Cohen tax and pay like 90% extra surcharge on all this. Like they could just say, you know what, like you want to go 300, we'll go 320 right there. We'll just go keep going mano a mano until we get the guy we want.
I think eventually it's going to exceed Cole's contract. I do. And it's not to say that like he isn't worthy of it. I just think at this point, the 250 number floated around, I thought was far too low, especially if we're in a bidding war for this. And I said this to you guys in our Cohen Money chat was they're going to come in with an offer, the Mets, that is going to be beat this. And Andy Martino is basically saying that Hal Steinbrenner isn't scared to play that game. I think it's really important for people to understand that the Mets and Yankees both have money coming off the books relatively soon that will be clearing. The Yankees have a little bit more long-term, like you mentioned, but the Mets deals like Starling Marte is going to be off the books within a couple of years as well. We obviously saw Canna was off the books. We saw Escobar's money off the books as well. Scherzer and Verlander are going to be one more year just because obviously Max opted in. It was a no-brainer decision for him. So the Mets are going to be on the hook for that. But in all reality, the Mets actually have a lot coming off, and they're not willing to part with those minor leaguers that they traded for at the deadline, which heading into the season, they have a couple of guys that, I don't know, I would say 3 to 4, maybe 3 guys off the top of my head are going to be ready to make that jump by the trade deadline, right? Would you say you see someone like a Vassell getting in at least by June or July? I think Acuna probably makes a debut sometime around then. We'll see how the other players progress. Some of them were actually growing rapidly. I don't know about Clifford and Drew Gilberts of the world, but I think at the very least, you see 2 more of those guys get brought up and be given an opportunity with this Major League Ball club. But yeah, is that what you want though, right? Like is this a Yamamoto or a bust in the offseason for you? Or are you kind of like, okay, if they pivot to a manga or I personally don't want Blake Snell. I know you're not too in love with it, but you wouldn't hate it either. What are your kind of like thoughts of like where they pivot after this? Because there's quite a few holes to fix because it's Senga, it's Quintana, it's Lucchesi perhaps. Like it's not the greatest of staffs right now, obviously. So what if Yamamoto is a no, what do you want to see the Mets do in terms of pitching?
Well, I think you need to have somebody who can be in the front of that rotation because remember the press conference too. David Stearns asked directly, said, "What do you mean by a competitive team like next year?" Because that was the big like buzzer they're throwing around. They said, "We want to compete for the playoffs, not competing for the playoffs." The rotation of Senga, Quintana, Severino,
Yeah, Stevie, I
Imanga,
forgot.
and like Joey Lucchese. You need to have somebody in there. I feel like the thing that you're worried about here, if you're a Met fan, is that like obviously they want to live up to that promise, and if Yamamoto ends up being a Dodger, for example, here, you want to get in the bidding war with the Yankees for Jordan Montgomery. That's not ideal.
Well, so which also makes it very interesting with the Montgomery stuff too, is that I mean, again, the Yankees are going to probably pivot to Jordan Hicks if they don't get Yamamoto. That's been the thing that's been out there at this point, especially one of the stronger links. So when you see someone like Jordan Hicks go there, so you kind of see. I still think the Yankees are going to add a starter. I don't think you go for nearly like $300 million for Yamamoto and say, yeah, we don't need any pitchers after that. It just doesn't make any sense. Or maybe just because he's such a unicorn that they're willing to go for a player like that. But Montgomery, I find interesting. Do you think he would want to go back to the Yankees after that entire situation and how they traded him basically for just a defensive outfielder replacement? Something that also the Mets are looking for, a fourth outfielder. I don't see how Monty goes back there. I think he's going to get a deal similar to Eduardo Rodriguez at this point. What do you kind of see going down there with that kind of offer? I'm thinking he gets around $20 million a year. Montgomery.
I think he's getting over 100 based on the playoff success he
Well,
had.
Total contract, yeah, but I meant like per season. So
I think like 20. I think between 20 and 25 a year is where I see him.
Okay. Would you be comfortable with the Mets doing that, or do you rather them pivot somewhere else and like if it's a Yamanga and then maybe go for Brandon Woodruff, which would probably be a 2-year deal, and you don't see him pitch until 2025? Like what do you kind of see there? Because we know the Mets aren't going to be in their trade market. Dylan Cease, Corbin Burns. I don't think that's realistic for them. What do you see if it's even not Montgomery?
I think it's Montgomery, or they're going like just for innings type. Because remember here, they had Quintana coming off an injury. They have Senga they're trying to be careful with the 6 days. Like Sevy, who knows? And like you can't get through a season where you're like hoping guys can like pitch like 4 or 5
Peterson's
innings.
Not going to be up till July-ish.
Yeah.
Anyway, if that goes well for him, but yeah.
Yeah, Montgomery, I think, as a guy, gives you dependable length. He'll make his starts, and like he's a guy who's shown he can do it in the postseason, and he can pitch here. Which I think Dave Stearns said recently, like if you can play in this market, that's a big factor they look at.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point by you. Is that a player like that who's been capable of, and Montgomery was solid with the Yankees. It's not like he was. I don't think anyone foresaw at all what he was going to do to the Houston Astros in the postseason. But you saw a decent pitcher in there when he was with the Yankees. So I'm curious to see where the Mets go with that. But talking about playing in this market and succeeding, Pete Alonso. This is our guy. We love him. Let me just grab my bobblehead real quick of Pete. I think you also went to this game, or no? I forget. I think we went to one game that they also had bobbleheads.
I went to the Polar Bear game. I had the Polar Bear bobblehead somewhere.
Okay. I knew you had some Pete memorabilia, but Pete is one of the best Mets hitters of all time already. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think truthfully, it kind of speaks volumes to what this franchise has produced. But Pete's going to be the most prolific home run hitter in this franchise. I think he's got the capability of actually hitting 500 in his career if he stays healthy enough. Pete, to me, is a no-brainer extension. Whether or not the Mets meet that Freddie Freeman threshold, which has kind of been, the barometer for what he wants, it's been reported what he wants. Obviously, the age is a little different. I don't think dollars per year is going to exceed Freddie Freeman, but I think in totality of the overall contract, Pete will get more than what Freddie got, and it'll be a Met for life. Whether it's an extension or next offseason, do you think the Mets should do this deal now? Because Scott Boras said himself that they're open and waiting to hear from David, but they haven't talked to David just yet regarding this. Does Pete Alonso sign an extension this offseason, Mike?
I think if he does, it's much closer to spring training. I think right now they're more worried about Yamamoto and filling the roster out because Pete's here. Pete's not going anywhere right now, and they basically said as much. He's going to be the first base on opening day. We want to be here for a long time. So, like, there's something you can go out to him in February. He goes to Port St. Louis and say, Pete, let's talk. And then, like, worst case scenario, I mean, this could be the Brandon Nimmo thing where Brandon Nimmo switches to Boras the year before he hits free agency, test the market, and the Mets say, okay, you go find out what you want to get, come back to us, then we'll see if you want to top the offer. I could see that happening, too.
Yeah, and I'm not too sure about how the competition will be for Pete. I think there'll be teams out there obviously interested in him. He's one of the more prolific home run hitters that have existed within the past five to 8 years or so, especially since he's been called up. I don't think the Mets let a guy like this get away. I think it's just about a matter of when and not where. I think Pete Alonso is going to be a Met for life. That's no inside information. That's just my gut feeling. Um, Speaking of Pop, this team needs a DH.
Yes, they do.
My goodness. I haven't liked a single thing we've done since the DH has come full time to the National League. I really wanted Kyle Schwarber when he was available. We obviously didn't go for that. I thought it was a more than reasonable contract. I think he got something around 4 for 80. He's been insane. I know he's obviously boomer bust with his batting average, his strikeouts, but Schwarber's a postseason performer. Teoscar Hernandez or Jorge Soler have been the hot names with that. We could see others come into the fold. Are these the two at the top of your wish list for the Mets DH, or is there another name that you had in mind?
Teoscar is number one on my list. I do think that he's a guy I really want because I think like he gets a bad rap for defense, but I think he's at least passable in the outfield where Soler cannot play it whatsoever, which is an issue when you have Starling Marte's health issues and they don't really have a left fielder right now. So I would
No.
I would prefer Teoscar. Like obviously he's got some pop. He had a rough year in Seattle, but I mean you look at like his totals. Like he gives you usually like 25 home runs and 90 RBIs. He'll give you a WAR somewhere between 2 and 3 usually, and like that's the kind of guy you want.
Yeah, I don't think it's a poor move either way for these two guys. I would say that a player like Lee would be going to San Diego. We've seen those reports now, right? If we're talking outfielders, because of the fact that they traded Juan Soto, it kind of opens up that avenue for them. Good friends with their shortstop, Kim. So I think that's something that you're actually going to see go down. But for me, I have no preference with this. I know some people are iffy on Teoscar because some think his best days are behind him. Jorge had a miserable first year with the Marlins, but kind of returned to that power form just last year. I think of it like this. The Mets are going to upgrade significantly at the DH position. You hear Stearns also talk about Vientos and DJ Stewart as two guys that are DH options. I don't think they're going to be the full-time DH. I think that's just kind of him saying, hey, if we need someone to fill in at this DH position at a point in time, we could pivot to these guys. I do see a Harrison Bader or a Michael A. Taylor being involved in that fourth outfielder position where they're just good defenders, and then you pivot and get an Teoscar or Soler to be your DH. Is that something you would like? Would you like a Michael Taylor and then a Soler and Teoscar just strictly be the DH? Or would you prefer to see someone that's a good enough hitter in the outfield and also can maybe do DH sometimes and they go with the Vientos and DJ Stewarts of the world? Or for me personally, I want the sure thing. I want Soler or Teoscar for the DH spot.
Yeah, I'd rather see them do what they see that they're trying to do, which is the Michael Taylor like Harrison Bader thing, where they're looking like, oh, let's get another guy who can play the outfield and give a little pop like out there, and we get DH guy situation. Because for me, like they don't have anyone out there right now. Like I'd rather like there's and also you look at the market, there's not a ton of straight up like outfielders who can hit and field. So like for me, it's like
Correct.
I would just like find an option I like. They seem to think Michael Taylor has enough pop and can play center field. Like that would be great because they can use him on the corner sometimes and reduce the burden on his legs. So why not? Like I would be game for that.
Yeah, and I think the more important thing is preventing Jeff McNeil from going out there as well, because as great of an athlete as Jeff is, he's in his 30s right now, so he's probably not going to age as well if you're having him go and play out there. As far as outfield prospects go, the closest is probably, again, going to be Drew Gilbert, but his estimated time of arrival is 2025, so you can't really count on him that much for this season. So I do think they make a move like that. For me, I think I would actually take Harrison Bader and I would go with Jorge Soler. I respect the avenue of Teoscar. I wouldn't be mad at either solution here, but I think a guy like Bader and then just Soler's overall pop. He's had so much success in the division too. I think would also just be another thing for me that I prefer. And I've wanted Soler for so long. So if I'm being quite honest with you. So we'll see how that goes. I think ultimately we see that transpire after what they do with the starting pitching.
Yeah.
So third base. they're not adding anybody third base outside of the organization. They have Ronnie Mauricio, they have Brett Beatty, and kind of Mark Vientos, and then Jeff McNeil as the emergency fourth, and Joey Wendell, that we cannot forget either, who is your Swiss Army knife at this point. So the third base job, I think this is make or break for Brett Beatty's New York Mets career this year. And I really don't mean to be harsh on the kid. I think he struggled mightily last year. We saw flashes of him when he makes contact, make good and hard contact, but it was few and far between. He really looked lost a good amount of the time last year. The defense was also shaky. Could have been an extension of him struggling at the plate and that carrying over to the field. I think that could have been something. But hearing David Stearns kind of answer that third base situation, he seemed more than comfortable discussing that the three options that they have in-house are what they're going to go with, and they're going to rock with it for the rest of the season. Who do you ultimately think wins this third base job, and who do you want to win this third base job? Is it Beatty all the way, or do you like Ronnie Mauricio and his upside?
Yeah, I think I like Beatty's swing. I like seeing him win the job. I think Mauricio will take it from him. That's just my general hunting situation. I feel like Mauricio has spent a lot of time now. He's in winter ball playing third base. He showed more at the plate than Beatty did in the majors last year in his brief sample size here. And I do think that, like, if he's competent defensively over there, and most Stearns made a big deal about run prevention this year, and I think if he's capable there, he's the guy that ends up winning that job. I think Beatty has a better defensive upside right now, but I think like his swing confidence is not there at all.
I get where you're coming from, but unfortunately for Ronnie, he's had 4 errors already. I think he had 3 in one game in Winter League. To me, that's just, it's too much. I do actually see Ronnie sneaking into that DH role. I'll say this. I think Vientos in general is the odd man out. I think Vientos is going to be the guy shipped for somebody at the deadline. I don't see him in his long-term future with the New York Mets. I think he's got pop. But ultimately, I think Ronnie, in general, as a profile, has so much upside in so many different areas. Whether or not he'll be a plus defender, I don't think he ever will be. I just think he's so much more versatile due to his athleticism that you could see him, okay, maybe he fills in for Beatty at the backup third base position, or he comes in and provides some pop. Like you mentioned, out of the 3, he showed the most at the plate. And I also just think he's kind of more electrifying than all these guys. And I just think that kind of stuff matters when you're playing in New York. Because I think guys like Cespedes, Jose Reyes over the years, Ronnie really gives me that kind of energy. I don't know if you agree with that as well. There's just something about him that he comes off as this electric athlete, and he has a ton of pop as well. We saw it in spring training. We saw him do it at the AAA level, where they were hoping that his OBP would kind of stay at that level because he was nearly 100 points above his career average. Where do you ultimately see Ronnie breaking it? Is it really strictly just third base for you, or do you kind of agree with the fact that maybe he does sneak in as a DH if that's a possibility?
I think that he ends up ultimately being for this team probably like a super utility guy, like sort of an upgrade on the Guillorme spot with the bat in terms of like not as good a defender, he can play everywhere. I'm telling you, like I was at the game where he had his first home run. I was sitting behind the plate for that game, which is pretty awesome. And like the sound the ball made off the bat from him is different than anybody else on these young kids has shown this year. Like he's got like special ability with the bat.
So your confidence level in very important to note too, with this Mendoza staff, Eric Chavez is back as co-hitting coach now because that's what the Mets wanted to do with this. It's a little bit unconventional, but they bring the guy back that they had so much success with in 2022, which was one of the better Mets lineups that we've actually ever seen. Take it that as you will. But yeah, everyone talks about pitching reclamation projects and the David Stearns effect. What about the hitters? Do you like Brett Beatty? Like what do you need to see from Brett Beatty is basically my question to kind of like solidify with it. Like he struggled in so many areas, right? Like there wasn't any power that we saw too, right? Like it's what about Brett Beatty is just not clicking? Is it just he seemed overwhelmed a good majority of the time? Like forget about just like bat to ball skills. He just didn't even look like he knew what was coming half the time.
Yeah, I feel like with him, part of the issue is a combination of like he was trying to think too much of the plate instead of like hitting. Maybe all those guys just like tries to incorporate all this data and not know how to utilize it correctly. Plus, like I think he's a little bit data right in his game where like he's better if he's going the other way with the ball. Conforto was this way as well, and I think like when he tries too hard to pull and this launch for power, like then you see the average plummet to the low 200s there it was.
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of basically go across his whole professional career, right? So if we're counting the minor leagues, his K percentage was the highest it's been since rookie ball.
Yeah.
Where he had 30% K rate. 28% was a massive leap. It was a bigger leap than when he was in AAA. Even the 42 plate appearances that he had in 2022 initially before, I think, what did he do? He broke one of his fingers.
It was a thumb issue, I think.
Yeah, he had an issue there. I mean, it's striking out a lot. It's just he's not even getting on. An OBP below 300 I really don't mean to be harsh, but it's disgraceful.
Yeah,
it's really bad. And it's just kind of like, we could think and read all these stats all we want from the minor league level. It's a totally different ballgame when you get to the major leagues. We've seen so many guys over the years. He just looked like one of those guys that seemed completely overwhelmed the second he got to the major league level. And it's funny because he hit a home run in his first at bat in 2022. Okay, so how about this? At the end of August, how many of these three, between Vientos, Beatty, and Ronnie Mauricio, are going to be playing on an everyday basis?
For the Mets?
Yes.
One of them.
Just one.
Just one.
What do you think happens to the other two then?
I think one ends up traded and one's in Syracuse. They didn't do the job at the big league level.
Ooh. What if one of them ends up in Syracuse? Good God. If you were to trade one of these three, who would you trade and why?
I think for me, it's like interesting because I feel like Vientos, I don't know what you're actually getting for him because I don't think that he has a ton of upside. I think you sort of have to make your pick between Beatty and Mauricio and trade the other one.
And from what I'm understanding from you, you trade Brett Beatty, right?
Yeah, I would.
You just wonder what kind of stock Beatty gives you. Like, what does Brett Beatty even net you in a trade if you're willing to do that? Like, it's for what? Like, maybe a relief pitcher? You try and get, like, someone that is kind of on the downswing, like Lopez was.
That's where you that's where you trust the Stearns talent evaluation. Maybe you see a distressed asset somewhere, and you say, okay, we could fix this guy, and like maybe a guy who's like not working. It's like, oh, we're getting to the pitching lab, working with our guys, and all of a sudden, like we fix this guy, and he becomes usable for us.
Yeah, for me, I think it's the biggest position that worries me for the Mets, and I think it'll make or break their season. Honestly, I think you know what you're getting with Alvarez. I think you know what you're getting with first, second, and shortstop. You know that we'll see if Starling Marte's healthy enough. Nimmo is as solid as he comes in center field. He's been a plus defender. Who knows with left field. Pitching staff has some question marks, but you are returning Edwin Diaz, and you have and Brooks Raley, and you have some reclamation projects in the relief pitcher roles. Relief pitching wise, who is somebody that you kind of see on the major league contract side of things that you kind of want the Mets to add?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing was Ottavino opting out. I don't think they're expecting that because I think he would have been a guy that would have been in the mix there. I could see them going back to if guys they want come out, but like the list of guys available is pretty long, and I think they're just gonna sit there, check back in mid-January, see who are the top options left. Say, okay, who wants a 1-year deal to come here at like high money? And I feel like they're gonna try and do the Dave Robertson like route again with somebody who like does not find a musical chair and says, okay, here's like $12 million comes out for Edwin for a year.
So, well, speaking of, Josh Hader is on the market. I think Hader is going to have a very similar but I think very similar situation to not where it's like Kimbrel levels, where Kimbrel was signed in June to the Cubs, I think. That 1 year where he was asking for the moon. Hader's one of the best relief pitchers actually to hit the free agent. I know Diaz hit the free agent market last year, but the Mets weren't letting him leave. Josh Hader, like, would you? I know it's unconventional. He's a traditional closer and all this, but what's the most you would give Josh Hader 1 year? Come to the New York Mets. We'll pay you to be this back end guy in the bullpen. If you can convince him, how much money would you throw at Hader? Would you give him 1 for 25?
I would. I just don't think he would take it. I think he wants to somewhere he can close.
Right? I don't even know where he goes at this point. Maybe even Texas. I really wonder if that's something that they would consider too. For me, I think you see a Stevenson get involved with the Mets too. Um, I just have a hard time seeing them really pay for like a front end relief pitcher here. I don't think there's like too many guys that are like you gotta have types that are really good 7 or 8s. You could possibly see a reunion with David Robertson. I wouldn't totally be stunned by that. Ottavino as well. Ottavino, I think it kind of sounded like he wanted multiple years, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of why he's not really returning because of just the 1 year deal. He's doing pretty well with SNY, so who knows? He probably has a future there.
Yeah.
I don't know. The starting pitcher and relief pitcher, it's just to me, I don't think they add too many starting pitchers because I think Vasil makes a debut much sooner than many anticipate. I thought he was pitching very well in AAA. I think they're probably actually going to call him up sometime in May, to be quite honest with you. I think he has that sort of upside that the Mets are looking at. I'm not saying they're going to rush him. I just think he's going to pitch well enough that the Mets are basically saying there, okay, this guy's ready. If he can come and help us right now, why not?
I think the thing with them you have to keep in mind here is like if they do manage to pull off a Yamamoto, for example, they're gonna rely like a lot on a 6-man rotation at points. And like this might be a thing where, like Tyler McGill is the 6th to start the year. And then, like, at some point, maybe he gets overtaken by a Vasil or a Christian Scott or whoever you say is ready.
How many games do you think Jose Butto pitches this year?
I'd say he gets probably like 4 starts.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think they're also very lefty heavy too. I think that's kind of the thing that I'm saying. And I know like maybe it's whatever, but you have Montgomery, you have Quintana, David Peterson if he ever comes back. Then there's Luke Casey. That's a lot of lefties for a rotation. And again, the big guys on the market that aren't Yamamoto are lefties. So I find that to be interesting. On a scale of 1 to 10, Mike Phillips, I'm circling back with Brandon Woodruff. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the likelihood of the Mets coming back in to sign Brandon Woodruff is?
6. I think just a 6.
Okay. And how much would you offer him per year?
It'd probably like I would give him like a 2 for 30.
You think he accepts 2 for 30, just $2 million more than Severino? I think he might be like a 2 for 36 guy. I could see.
Yeah, well, it depends what his market looks like also.
What do you think is? I think the Dodgers are going to be a player in for him too.
Yeah.
I also do see the Dodgers pivoting for Cease, which is also like something the White Sox have been. The reports have been out on the White Sox have been that like it's not that they don't want to trade Dylan Cease, is that they'd rather see teams that miss out on Yamamoto potentially or even Ohtani kind of get back into that race of like, okay, you didn't get Shohei, you didn't get Yamamoto. Here's a really good pitcher that's available on the market for, I believe he has 2 years of control. I see a team like that hopping back in for him. And again, I think the report was from John Heyman that the Brewers, like, don't be surprised if, like, towards spring training, Corbin Burns gets traded. Do you? And again, I know I just keep on going on a tangent here, but this is just the fun ideas of the offseason. Corbin Burns is available, and I know the Mets probably won't do it just because, like, if you don't trade for Juan Soto, then you probably don't trade for Corbin Burns, right? Regardless of contracts. Would you ever want that to be a scenario in which the Mets would go and try and trade for Corbin Burns? Or you're kind of not really. I know Will isn't the biggest lover of him, but would you even want them to consider that or go after him?
I think for me, I would rather not give the ads up because if you look at next year's free agent market, there are so many starting pitchers on there, and you should have a better idea at the end of this year, like what some of your kids look like how close they are, and you have no idea how many holes you have to fill because Quintana is gone next year. Severino is gone next year in all likelihood, barring something very strange going on with that. And like you will have openings for pitching here, so like I'm sure they'll make at least one big free agent pitching splash next winter as well to go with the other guys.
Yeah, I would agree with you with that. I don't see the Mets really doing it. I would say something at the trade deadline. If something's opportunistic for them and they're playing pretty well, I think that's a different conversation. But prior to the season starting, I agree with you. Because again, you have the draft. What are they going to be drafting? 16th or 18th?
19.
Something like that. 19? You said?
Yep. And you like to hear something funny, by the way.
Go for it.
I just saw a tweet from LA Network, and you know how Mr. Morosi never mentions the Mets?
Sure.
Now there's a video out that says now the Mets are, quote unquote, certainly one of the favorites, if not the favorites right now for Yamamoto.
Yeah, which is very funny because almost every single time Morosi, like you mentioned, was reporting on deals, the Mets weren't even involved, despite almost every other major outlet. And then on top of it, just all the beat reporters saying that the Mets were in on certain players, but Morosi doesn't seem that tapped into the Mets. I mean, listen, there's a couple of things to go off of, right? And I'll just read what Jeff Passan said. Quote, I think Yamamoto wants to get paid. Steve Cohen flew all the way to Japan to see him, private jet all the way to the other side of the world. If he's willing to do that, I think that says a lot about how he feels about Yamamoto. And then go on, there's the SNY quote from Andy Martino. Quote, the Mets are a real contender for Yamamoto. Talking to his people, they're taking the Mets candidacy very seriously. So this is something to watch. Andy's is just a little bit of kind of, I guess, a follow-up report to what Passan was saying. And then obviously you hear what Morosi said as well. And then you shared something that you said as well with Andy Martino. After Steve Cohen and David Stearns' visit to Yamamoto in Japan last week, the Mets seemed better positioned than they had been before. So I find it very funny in how I want to talk about the overall approach into how the Mets go about these negotiations is that no one knows anything.
Yeah, they don't leak anymore.
There's no leaks with this, right? We're not Zach Wilson, New York Jets, Salah situation where guys are having potty mouth.
We're not
New York Mets keeping things close to vest is very rare to hear, but it has been a thing under the Cohen era.
Yeah, because remember the Wilpon era, the whole thing was, oh, we like this guy, we like this guy, we like this guy. Like we like all the big stars. All of a sudden, oh, here's Rick Porcello. We couldn't get the big stars, so.
Or the quotes about, I don't know too many teams that have won the World Series with two $30 million players on their roster. So many different things that we could go through the Wilpon era of. I got to be honest with you. I do think there's more positives coming from this Yamamoto thing regarding the Mets and this situation. My ultimate gut feeling, and it's just my feeling, is speculation. Everything that everybody's saying at this point is speculation. But it just feels like if the Yankees offer comes close, you can't help but feel that Yamamoto is going to select them. And that's also why I've been saying it has to exceed $300 million. I think you have to blow the other teams out of the water with their offer. I think the Mets do that. And I think, I'm not saying it's going to get to a point that the Mets are bidding against themselves, because even Cashman's comments too are kind of interesting regarding Yamamoto. You're already hearing leaks about like, oh, if they don't get Yamamoto, they're interested in Jordan Hicks. It's just one of those things, like if you're trying to connect the dots and go off of like literally every single thing that they're saying, you could be sitting there saying to yourself, are the Yankees as confident as some would think for Yamamoto? I don't know. I think it's really kind of close to a coin flip at this point. I would kind of say it 55% towards the Mets, 45% Yankees. And I wouldn't be opposed to someone saying it's the other way around. I just think this, like Mark Feinsand said, it's a coin flip. Do you think this is still a coin flip? I know we mentioned this earlier in the episode. Or are you leaning towards more of that positivity of like, yeah, at this rate, if he wants to get paid, what better team to pay him than the New York Mets under Steve Cohen?
Yeah, because the question obviously is here, like, how high that like Hal wants to go with the contract. Because I mean that's the big difference. Because like if they're both coming in around over 250, I think it's more likely he's going to choose the Yankees. Because obviously the whole thing about the tradition, the brand, like he loves Matsui. Matsui's meeting with them on Monday. Like I think that's more realistic. But like if the Yankees top out at like 240 and the Mets are in 290. No matter if you love the brand, it's hard to leave $50 million on the table.
And yeah, I don't think there's a chance. I think so. Say like in this hypothetical, right? The Yankees come in, they offer 270 to Yamamoto, and the Mets come in with an offer in the 290 range for Yamamoto.
Yeah.
In my opinion, Yamamoto accepts the 270 from the Yankees.
Yes.
If it's within that $20 million range in total for the contract, the average salary over those years isn't drastically different, right? It's just total contract money. For me, for the Mets, it's just really you have to exceed 300 million to get Yamamoto. I think it's going to exceed 300 million. And ultimately, I think that would favor the Mets if it gets to that point. The real question is, does it get to that? And again, the quotes are interesting too with the Yankees and the payroll. Hal not shy to go past 300 million, but 300 million for the payroll. Do you see the Yankees paying 300 million for a starting pitcher is also another question.
They would have two of them.
Two pitchers there. Yeah. Go for it. Sorry.
They'd have two of them there at that point because Cole's already got 324.
Correct. And then again, if he kind of continues to opt out, Boris was just kind of like, the Yankees are going to trigger that 10th year. They're just going to give him the extra year at that point, which I definitely see happening. I don't think Cole leaves. The only scenario in which Cole opts out, it's, potentially want to renegotiate the contract because he's been amazing. Again, Cole's not leaving the Yankees. I don't see that. Again, yeah. I mean, Rodon got the bag. We see they're probably going to go back in for Soto as well, obviously, to extend him long-term. You also see this scenario with two $300 million pitchers for the Yankees, plus Rodon, Nestor Cortez, whoever they really want to fill out for that fifth after the trade that they just made. For me, the Yankees offering $300 million for Yamamoto, I don't even think they have to do it to get him. And I don't think they will. I think if the Yankees get Yamamoto, I think it's in that 270 to 290 range. I don't think they exceed 300. Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't think they go that high. I think they have a number they're comfortable with. They feel like that their brand and their tradition is going to be the difference and get him to leave money on the table. I feel like that's where they feel they are.
Yeah, so basically it's worth over 30 million to them. Yep. So if they come in with 270, it's like Brand, Matsui, Tanaka, that's an extra 30 million.
Number 18 being held for you.
And I understand it. I think the Yankees are obviously a more attractive position at this point in time as well. And it's not to say long-term the Mets aren't. I'm curious to see, David Stearns' words as well are always very interesting, right? Like what their pitch is, because it's kind of hard to pitch the Mets at this point. It's not that hard to pitch the Mets, right? Because you have a lot of money. They've rebuilt the farm system. There is a core of players there that are very good. I think Senga matters too. I think that if you're the Yankees right now and you want to win a World Series, or if you're Yamamoto right now, that's the team to go to. Yeah. And even next year, right? So even if the Mets progress well enough, they have a pretty decent 2024, because everyone's like, the Mets are punting. No, I think they're just pivoting in strategy. They're not going to be as aggressive. We saw that, right? Because of the Cohen, not the mandate, but it was a 3 to 5 year comment. But they tried their strategy of short-term, high dollars for older players, because that was all on the market at that point, that they could have reinvested in. I think they were very smart about it. I don't think the Mets are being ran stupidly. I think there's certain things that they still do that are very Metsy-esque, like Epler at the 2022 deadline. But if Stearns is in here, this is a Frank Cashin change of perception, right? This is what he's supposed to be. David Stearns is supposed to change the entire narrative of the New York Mets. And it's not to say he has to do it you know what I'm saying? It's an overnight thing. I think it's over time. And the way he addresses it, it's here's why we think you would be a great fit for this organization and what we plan on doing in the coming years. Because they're also building a super staff as well, right? Andy Green is one of these guys that's supposed to oversee the minor league system that's highly touted. Stearns has great connections. He's not even 40 yet, right? How much older is he than you? I don't even think he's that much older than you, right?
Not much.
Yeah, so if all goes well, we're talking about a guy who could have a Brian Cashman tenure in terms of years. I'm not saying championships at all. But yeah, I think we're going to have to blow the Yankees out of the water in order to get Yoshinobu Yamamoto to Queens. Ultimately, I don't think the Mets get Yamamoto. And maybe that's just the suffering side of myself, and lacking optimism. Do you see this happening? I know I'm kind of running in circles and repeating questions, but I think Yamamoto happening, you think?
Coin flip. I think it's as simple as Finance and say, because we get until we know how much money these guys are both willing to throw at it, you can't really make a fair judgment.
I agree. I agree. I just don't see much of that changing. Um, but yeah, any other topics or stuff that you want brought up really quick here before we kind of head on out and get sort of these clips up online? Um, I think the Mets are going to have an off season that is viewed in the moment as not great, but I think it'll age well over time into how they approached it, not being absurd and spending like drunken sailors. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I feel like you're already seeing like Mets Twitter get riled up because they're seeing all these random guys signing who have like ERAs that don't look great or like numbers that don't look great, and like you have to realize here, like this is kind of how David Stearns operates, and he's doing the Milwaukee operation right now. Like he has obviously the big money. And the big money takes time, but he's trying to fill his margins out. So like it may not look great if it's Yamamoto, Severino, Teoscar, and like a bunch of like random dudes for the bullpen, but like you wanted this guy so bad, you had to actually let him do what he wants to do.
No, I agree with that. I find it hilarious when Mets fans are just so angry at David Stearns first week into December, saying like, "Oh, how could you be so aggressive? Like you're asleep at the wheel and like this and that." And it's kind of like, "Hey, man, like the Mets knew what this offseason was going to entail. They're coming off one of probably, I don't know. I mean, it's really up to your opinion with this, but it's got to be the most disappointing season that I can remember since 2007. I think there's no question about it at that rate. In terms of expectations and how everything played out, the fact is this: the Mets still won 75 games in spite of all of that. 75 is not a great number, but it's also only 7 wins away from a winning record.
Yeah.
And if you're telling me we're adding the best closer in baseball back, you're probably adding a much better DH. You're going to get a full season of a nice catcher. Starling Marte can't be any unhealthier than he was this past season. Again, if you're adding to that starting pitching, and you guys just need them to eat innings, right? It just pitch, right? No, not these lifeless corpses that they throw out there on the mound. If the Mets can simply just get guys healthy and to pitch, just to eat innings, I think there's a window of, depending on who they add at the DH position, of anywhere between 83 to 86 wins. And sometimes, like we saw this past year, that's enough to get into the wild card. As of today, Mike Phillips, how many wins do the New York Mets get in 2024?
With this roster?
Yes, with all these holes right now.
With the incomplete roster, probably about right where they were.
I think even less, to be honest. Yeah. You know, I think they're like 72. I don't love third base. I don't love the corner outfield positions as of today as well. Marte is just such a wild card in all of this. I think Marte in the third base hinges on a lot. DH, there's no DH. Yeah, man. I would see something like that, and the staff is brutal.
Yeah,
it's brutal. The Quintana is your number 2 right now.
Yeah, that's not good.
Sevy's your 3. McGill, your 4 or 5. Lucchesi, your 4 or 5. Peterson's not going to be able to pitch for months. Yikes. Yeah, but we'll see how they do. Yeah, and as far as relief pitchers go, I think they'll just get guys, like you said, to just eat up innings. Tonkin is one of those guys that's just gonna bridge the gap. I think you said in the chat he's gonna be a Trevor Williams type that they had, who was such a key piece in 2022. With that, there have been no updates in the middle of this entire recording. So as of right now, Yoshinobu Yamamoto is not a New York Met or a New York Yankee or even a Dodger for that matter. But the Mets heading into the 2024 2023 offseason have not filled most of their holes as of December 8th. But hopefully on December 15th, we see this roster rounded out a little bit more. Mike Phillips of the Just End the Suffering podcast. Mike, where can people follow you and tune into all of your work?
Yeah, because social media is mphillips331 across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You also can check out the YouTube channel, Mike Phillips on YouTube. Video versions of conversations from the Just End the Suffering podcast and the Sky Guys podcast are up there too. So like all you Star Wars fans, a lot of fun stuff there too if you like that. But sports stuff is Just End the Suffering.
I think that your podcast is a must listen to if you are a person who loves Mets and Jets and also just enjoys watching TV when you
Yeah.
don't have to watch those two
Yeah.
teams. So, by the way, watched Oppenheimer, awesome movie.
Yeah.
I would say that is not better than Dunkirk. Um,
I still
and
have to.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I did watch it just once, so I probably have to watch again. I still don't. I think it's better than the Tenets, the Mementos of the Nolan films, but and Batman Begins. I would maybe have it above Dark Knight Rises as a movie itself, but in
Yeah.
terms of like just like a movie going experience, I would say that Dark Knight Rises was more enjoyable. But Oppenheimer, man, oh my goodness, I think that was really good. Cillian Murphy was incredible.
Yeah, I love that movie so much. I'm trying to look up right now where I had it in my Nolan rankings. I put that after I saw the movie, so I think I'm going to go back and check on that. But it was very high. I remember that much.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, other than that, Mike, thank you so much. Guys, if you enjoy the podcast, subscribe to the channel. If you like soccer, have any interest in the U.S. men's national team, Christian Pulisic does play for AC Milan now, so I would tune in if you're interested in that kind of stuff. They play Atalanta tomorrow on Saturday. But yeah, if you don't see this full podcast up, none of this matters in what I'm saying right now. But you could listen and tune into the clips that we have as well. But thank you, Mike, and we'll see you guys next time.